So last week, Lisa did a video about this tank and the catastrophe that happened when she put her betas in there, the big outbreak and a lot of fish death and 2 tanks of fish dying because of a lack of quarantining her new fish. That's a very important topic, and it's one that we could probably make 25 videos on. Well, today, we're actually going to talk about quarantining again, because I did a video a few weeks ago where I added these 2 new arowanas to this tank, and I did it without quarantining them. And you, in the comments, you definitely let me know that I didn't quarantine them. Of course, I knew that I didn't quarantine them. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about why I didn't quarantine them and all of that. But before I do that, I got to paint this background. I've been talking about it for a couple of weeks now. I got to paint those couple of little spots there because it's driving me crazy. I'm sick of talking about it. I'm going to take care of that, and then we'll talk. There we go. Now it's all taken care of. You can still kind of see it, but that's because the paint's still wet. Once it dries, it'll be fine. I'm very glad to have that finally done. Now, if you're not familiar with why I had to do that, it's because I had a small leak in one of the hoses on the back of the tank. This was about, I don't know, 3-4 weeks ago, and I fixed that leak. Everything's good to go there, but because it was leaking back there, the water got behind the paint and it just made the paint peel off. So it's been that way for a couple of weeks, few weeks, and it was something that was just absolutely driving me crazy. So glad to have that out of the way. If you missed that video where I talked about that, I'll put a card up here. Is it here? So in the beginning of this video, I said we're going to talk about quarantining, and that is what we need to talk about now. If you are watching YouTube, if you like to watch a lot of fish keeping YouTube videos, and you've seen a fish keeper introduce new fish into their tank without quarantining them, if you scroll down to the comment section of that video, you're going to find a lot of people ripping that person apart for not quarantining their fish. I'll put the link up of, I think it's here. I'll put the link up of the video that I did introducing these. Go down to the comment section. You'll see people. They didn't necessarily rip me apart, but they were like, no quarantine? It's the first question that gets asked all the time whenever I add fish really to anything. I've added fish to empty tanks before. I don't mean empty like they have water in them, but they didn't have fish in them. I've put fish into tanks that have no other fish in them at all, and people have blasted me in the comment section. No quarantine? Why would anyone quarantine fish that are going into a tank by themselves? I don't think it's a bad thing to ask somebody why they didn't quarantine, but if they're putting fish into a tank that doesn't have any other fish in it, that's possibly the dumbest question that's ever been asked. So to anyone who commented that on my videos where we're putting fish into a tank with nothing else, and you commented, why no quarantine? Oh, I was just about to call those people something, but I'm not going to do that because I'm a nice guy. But anyway, you will see that on YouTube videos. You'll see people getting ripped apart for this. And you know what? I think the argument is real. I think the argument is valid, but sometimes you just can't quarantine. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Like we talked about in the beginning of this video, Lisa did a video last week talking about introducing 6 Cory cats to her beta sorority tank, and she did that without quarantining, and it turned out to be the biggest catastrophe ever because she lost a couple of betas. She also lost an entire tank of purple emperor tetras, which was heartbreaking for her. I'll put a link to that video up there too. I hope I'm pointing to the right corner, but anyway, she talked about the importance of quarantining, and that is absolutely wholeheartedly what her and I believe, that you should absolutely quarantine your fish. But if you can't, because you only have one tank, or maybe you're buying fish that are very big like I did and you just don't have the ability to quarantine those fish. What do you do? So these two fish, when I bought them, I'll put some B-roll of when I got these fish. They were about 12 inches and 10 inches, or maybe 10 inches and 8 inches. I don't know. I didn't measure them, but they were good sized fish. And I don't have any quarantine tanks that would house these fish for 6 weeks while I'm quarantining them. I mean, I just don't have one. I've got a 4-foot tank that's full of fish in my office. What am I going to do with all the fish that are already in there? You understand what I'm saying? I've got a lot of tanks, and I've got a lot of big tanks, but I don't have a tank that I could house these two fish in for 6 weeks until I know that they're perfectly clean. I don't have the ability to do that. Maybe you only have one tank and you want to get some new fish and you just don't have the ability to quarantine them, and you're certainly not going to go through the expense of setting up an independent quarantine tank, which you should, but if you can't, I get it. What are you going to do if you get new fish and you want to introduce them to the tank? Are you just never going to add fish because you'll get ripped apart for not quarantining them? No, you can do it, but it's risky. The main reason why we quarantine fish is to ensure that they don't have any diseases, that they're not carrying any parasites or anything like that from the fish farm or the pet store or wherever they came from. We want to make sure those fish are clean so that they don't infect the fish that you already have, making them sick, and everybody dies. And that's kind of what happened in Lisa's tank. Everybody didn't die because she caught it early enough, except for the Purple Emperor tank. But anyway, if you catch it early, you could be okay. But a lot of times with these parasites and bacterias and stuff like that, you might have an issue that happens so fast that you can't react fast enough, or maybe it happens at an inconvenient time, whatever, and you can't react fast enough and you end up losing all of the fish in your tank. So quarantining makes sense to put these fish in the tank, keep them in there for as long as possible to make sure that they're perfectly clean before you introduce them into the tank that has your good prized fish in them. Like mine, I've got 2 Oscars, 2 gold Severums, a vampire pleco, a common pleco, and I had an arowana in here. I had all those fish in here already. They're very special to me. I wanted to add 2 more arowanas, and I couldn't quarantine them because I just don't have a tank big enough for that. So there's really 2 options. One would be go buy a big, huge tank and then quarantine them. Okay, I'm not going to do that. The other is to kind of quarantine them in the tank. And here's what I mean. You can follow the same procedure that you would in a quarantine tank in this tank, which would be to put them in there, monitor them extensively. I mean, pay attention to these fish, watch their every move, watch the way they're behaving, watch the way they're eating, look for blemishes or white spots or anything on the fish. You're going to monitor the fish and treat them with a quarantine med kit. They don't sell quarantine med kits, but I'm saying there is Aquarium Co-op. He preaches erythromycin, general cure, and a ick medication, Super Ick X or Ick X, or I don't know all the different names, Super Ick Cure, but that's what he does to quarantine his fish. You can absolutely do that, and you can do it while the fish are in with the other fish. But I did not do the full med trio. What I did, I put the 2 new arowanas in there, and I treated the tank with general cure. And general cure only. General cure is an absolutely fantastic product, and it is the remedy to most fish diseases out there, but it's the only one I could find that I could get in a big enough tub. I actually bought a tub of it, which it's over there, and I don't want to walk over there and go get it, but I don't know what size it is. It was a tub about that big, but it's better than the little packets. That's 360 gallons. It would have cost a fortune to use those little packets, but I used the tub instead, and you just measure it out and you put it in there. I did that, and I did that for the first couple of weeks while the new arowanas were in there, and everything seemed fine. Plus, I was looking at these fish every single day, multiple times per day. Lisa was checking on the fish every single day. We were making sure everything was fine with these fish and treating them at the same time. And guess what? They were fine. And you know what? If I'm being completely honest, brutally honest with you, the store that they came from, you absolutely should quarantine fish that come from that store. Good people, and it's a really cool store, but it's a little shaky in there sometimes. I would absolutely quarantine fish that come from that store. But I couldn't. I just couldn't. So I had to do it another way. I decided to quarantine them in the tank, and it worked out. So is this the ideal thing to do? Of course it's not. No. Perfect world scenario is you have a spare fish tank somewhere that is running all the time, or you set it up when you need it, and you quarantine your fish in there. You isolate them in that tank by themselves for 4 to 6 weeks or even longer to make sure they're clear, they don't have anything that they're gonna bring into your tank that has your special fish in there. That's a perfect world scenario. We can't all do that, and if you can't, the worst thing you can do is just drop them in there and say, they'll be fine. Because guess what? You saw last week in Lisa's video what can happen if you do that. You can't trust anyone. You can't trust any fish retailer. You automatically should assume that those fish have something. And if the fish that are in your tank are important to you, you absolutely should quarantine them before you put them in there, because you don't want to lose everything. If you can't though, you need to make sure that you're heavily monitoring your fish. Heavily monitoring. Does that even make sense? I don't know, but you need to make sure you are paying close attention to your fish's behavior, the fish's appearance, their appetite, everything. Make sure that they are healthy, and if they're not, get them out of there and figure out what you're gonna do. But you can quarantine the fish in the tank. It's not the best way to do it, but if it's the only option you've got, you gotta do what you gotta do. So I know this video is kind of all over the place. I apologize for that. It's kind of going back to the old school way that I used to make videos, where I just basically turn on the camera and just start talking, and we'll see what comes out. But this is a very important topic. If you're not quarantining fish, you should. If you can't quarantine fish, you might as well treat them as if you are quarantining them. When you put them into the tank, put some medications in there, monitor them heavily, closely, pay attention, do this right, and don't kill your fish like we did. Now, as far as an update goes on this tank, it's perfectly fine. There is no problem with these fish at all. They're healthy, they're happy, they're getting along with the other fish in the tank. We don't have any problems. They're completely fine. You can say we got lucky. I don't know. I don't think we got lucky. I think we just know what to look for, and we've been doing this long enough. Plus, another thing, I looked very closely at the fish before I even paid any money for them. That's another thing. If you know what to look for when you're in the store, then you should be fine. You're going to buy fish that aren't sick to begin with. What are you looking for? The same things you'd be looking for when you're quarantining them. Their appetite, if you can get the fish to eat while you're at the store, that's great. Their appearance, their behavior, are they lethargic? Are they sitting there depressed and sad? Then you might not want to buy those fish. Do they have white spots on them? Do they have open wounds? Things like that. If they have those things, don't buy the fish to begin with. Common sense, right? You don't need to quarantine those fish because you're not going to buy them. So I looked very closely at these fish. I also looked closely at the fish that were in the tank with them at the store, and they all appeared to be fine. So took a chance, and it worked out. So there you go. If you're gonna quarantine your fish in the tank, do it with medications. I used General Cure. The main reason why I didn't go with all 3 of the medications is because the other fish are in there. They're fine. They don't need to be medicated. I wanted to medicate the existing fish as little as possible. So I just went with General Cure, and again, it all worked out. So there you go. You know, we can't all quarantine our fish for one reason or another. We should, but if we can't, hopefully now you understand a little bit more things that you can do to quarantine them when they're in the tank, and you'll be fine. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss future videos like this. We're doing all kinds of stuff, having all kinds of fun. Thursday nights, 9 o'clock Eastern time, 9 p.m. Tank Talk Live. We do it right here. We have a ton of fun. You're not going to want to miss that anyway. I am done. See you next week.